great to have folks here. This is a monthly opportunity that we have to get together and talk about important policy issues around the county and in the city of San Jose. So thank you so much for coming. Our topic today is opportunity housing at the simplest form, because you will hear more detail going forward. This is a consideration and exploration of allowing 2 to 4 homes to be built on lots that are currently zoned exclusively for single family. If you've been paying attention, or even if you haven't been paying close attention, there's been a lot of interest. Sometimes it's hard to know from the coverage or next door exactly what's happening. And so we made a really concrete decision today to invite the city of San Jose's planning department to the table to explain their process, what is and what isn't happening. And then we've also invited, and Jessica Saitwan is going to be giving us a presentation. And then we've also invited Kiyomi Honda Yamamoto from the Law Foundation. She's the lead policy attorney. And Aaron Eckhouse from California YIMBY, who's the regional policy director, to give a brief presentation on why they're supportive of this effort going forward. The goal is to provide some sunshine and to have a real open conversation. So we're really pleased that folks are here. I want to make it clear that Silicon Valley at Home is not neutral on this topic. We are strong supporters of the idea of opportunity housing. We believe this is a really important policy tool. It's just a part of a solution to the housing crisis that we're facing, but we think it's an important part. And that ideally it provides opportunities that don't currently exist to help us deal with the fact that we are pushing young families, empty nesters, working families out of the city if they can't afford rents in different resource-rich places where they can feel a sense of stability and safety and have access to great schools and neighborhood amenities. Finally, we think this is important because it's a recognition of the history of single-family zoning, which was a decision that cities made historically, often driven by an intent to exclude racially and economically portions of the populations of our cities by creating both economic and geographic patterns of separation. And the fact that this was a choice that we made, we feel means that it's a choice that we can review and unmake in a way that will allow us to try to address the fact that it's continuing to reinforce some divisions in our city. So where are we now? I'm really pleased that folks from the city are going to give us a sense of what the process is, and I want to introduce Jessica Saitwan from the Planning Department of the City of San Jose.
Thanks, Matthew. Should I go ahead and share my screen to start a presentation?
That would be great.
All right. Yes. All right, do you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let me go ahead and minimize some of these boxes that I have. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Saitwan, and I am a planner with the City of San Jose's Department of Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement. And with me today, we have Jared Hart as well, who's the division manager for the citywide planning team. And we'll both be here to, help answer questions after the presentation. We have a brief overview of opportunity housing for you, and we're going to start with some of the background on zoning in San Jose and the housing crisis. So currently, of all the residential land in San Jose, 94%, so almost all of it, is designated for single family homes, which is much higher than the national average of 75% of residential land in big cities that are zoned for single family homes. And you can see the extent of the land with the light yellow on the screen, on the map on the screen, and that shows all the land for the single family neighborhoods. The shortage of land to build homes is one of the contributors to the housing shortage and affordability crisis. And we see that all over the Bay Area and San Jose, especially with median home sale prices reaching $1.225 million in Q4 of 2020. And it continues to rise through 2021. So with these issues, we must ask ourselves, where do workers, teachers, young families, and others go who can't necessarily afford a single family home? A lot of families, they don't qualify for affordable housing, but they also can't afford a typical single family home in San Jose. And additionally, you know, these young families may not want to live in these higher density developments and prefer single family neighborhoods. And so what is opportunity housing? Opportunity housing is one way to deliver more housing choices by allowing additional housing types in existing single family neighborhoods while keeping the general form and scale of a typical residential neighborhood the same. And we've had people ask if we're considering this to meet our housing production goals, and yes, it'll help, but it's just one strategy in the toolbox. And what this will do is provide additional housing choices rather than just single family or multi-family homes. It would allow multi-unit housing such as duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes on properties with a residential neighborhood land use designation, which we use for single family neighborhoods. They're affordable by design. And so they're not, you know, they're not deed restricted affordable at a certain, you know, average median income. They are naturally affordable by its design. You know, it shares a wall. It's smaller compared to a typical detached single family home. So it is, you know, more cost effective. It can also be referred to as missing middle housing, which refers to the scale of the building. But occasionally it's also used to reference the missing housing type for the missing or the middle or working class. And between 1990 and 2013, less than 10% of housing was built in this missing middle scale. And that's why many refer to it as missing. So post-World War II, the city built primarily single family housing, detached, and it's only been since 2013 that we see these 4 to 6 story residential buildings that we see a lot of in San Jose. And, you know, as you guys may know, a lot of cities have already allowed opportunity housing type development, including Minneapolis, Seattle, and Portland. In fact, the state of Oregon passed legislation to allow more housing types in their exclusively single family housing zones throughout the state. And then in the past couple months, you know, cities across Northern California are also jumping on the bandwagon for, you know, allowing additional housing choices in single family neighborhoods like Sacramento. They're exploring that through their general plan update, as is South San Francisco. And the city of Berkeley's city council also joined them in citing racist ties to zoning for exclusively single family neighborhoods. So it's a movement that's just gaining steam across the nation and across the state. So why are we talking about opportunity housing? I'm sure some of you are wondering how we got to this point. And this was part of the general plan 4-year review, which is a periodic check-in, so to speak, of our general plan documents and policies. The city council had directed staff to explore opportunity housing as part of that scope of work. They wanted staff to explore allowing single family parcels currently designated with the residential neighborhood land use designation to allow 2 to 4 units with some, you know, parameters. So limiting it to parcels near transit-oriented urban villages or immediately adjacent to residential parcels with existing medium density building types, developing a set of design guidelines to make sure that it fits within, you know, these typically single family neighborhoods, allowing flexibility on the number of units and what's called the number of units per parcel, depending on the lot size, location, and other factors, clarifying that redevelopment remains within discretion of the property owner, and specifying that it would be sensitive to historic neighborhoods while also validating that it's cost effective. And so opportunity housing would also help the city meet the assigned housing allocation needs as assigned by the Association of Bay Area Governments for the 2023 to 2031 years. So in the draft regional housing needs allocation, San Jose is assigned to build 62,200 units, and that's just a draft number. And that's further broken down by different income ranges. So the very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. The allocation also encourages homes to be built in areas that have higher opportunity, which we'll go over in a bit. So this allocation is certainly not the driver behind opportunity housing, but it will certainly help the city in reaching its goals. As I mentioned earlier, the housing needs allocation, it encourages cities to build in these higher resource areas. And these resource areas are defined by the state's Department of Housing and Community Development. They publish opportunity maps each year, and they analyze economic, environmental, and educational indicators, which define these areas that have high opportunities. And so they're likely communities with access to jobs, access to good schools, higher educational attainment, and more. So in response to that direction, staff and the General Plan Task Force discussed the topic at 4 different meetings. And so we looked at allowing up to 4 units per parcel and analyzed where it would make the most sense. We looked at allowing a mix of single family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, noting that there is existing state legislation that allows ADUs. So per state law, opportunity housing developments would be allowed to build ADUs if they comply with the city zoning code. So as part of this process, we also looked at considerations and next steps that would be needed to implement opportunity housing. So what's being recommended? There's actually 2 recommendations on the table. So staff's recommendation is consistent with the city council direction. So keeping opportunity housing generally within a half-mile walk shed around transit-oriented urban villages and or on parcels that share a property line with properties that allow multifamily residential. But the task force had a different recommendation. They recommended that the city council should explore opportunity housing for properties citywide that have a residential neighborhood land use designation. And with the addition that staff should proceed with its recommended opportunity housing work plan and prioritize urban village planning. So there are 2 different recommendations, and they will both be presented to city council for their consideration. We received a lot of questions about protections for historic resources. Under our recommendation, staff would explore strategies to preserve historic areas and properties while still allowing opportunity housing. We'd consider allowing adaptive reuse of structures for historic properties, but would also consider an age-based rule for older homes if the historic resources inventory update's not complete by the time of implementation. So, for example, we consider requiring any homes built before the 1950s to go through a single family house permit for redevelopment to ensure that historic characteristics are maintained. And that is a permit that is not necessarily by right. It would require approval from the planning director and may require public notification depending on the size of the project. So we're thinking of a similar process for opportunity housing that we have for single family homes currently. And we may require those properties that meet the age-based rule to also follow in these footsteps and go through this application process, but that's yet to be determined and will be analyzed as part of the next phase. We also received a lot of questions about the design standards and what they would be and whether we're changing setbacks or heights, like what parking would be, the floor area ratio, et cetera. But we don't know the answer to that yet. It's a little too early in our process to make those determinations. And we also want to engage the community when we do, when we start drafting these and revising these standards. So these changes would only be explored should council provide direction of staff to explore opportunity housing. And as you heard earlier, in that scope of work from City Council, the intent is to stay to the form and the scale of a typical single family neighborhood while, at the same time allowing additional units. We also receive a lot of questions in terms of, who would be responsible for public utility and infrastructure needs. And, the developer would be, we would have the developer pay fees like park land impact fees and school fees and others to ensure that they pay into and support the added demand on services. We've also received questions about potential displacement and what protections there would be for long-term renters in existing homes. So as part of our recommendation, staff would conduct a displacement risk analysis to identify any communities that are at risk. And if the existing city protections, such as the Ellis Act ordinance and apartment rent ordinance and others, if they're sufficient, or if we need to introduce additional regulations. So here we show the staff recommended half-mile area in the blue shade. Note that the dark gray symbolizes the transit urban villages. And those are urban villages that are near existing or planned transit stations like BART or light rail or bus rapid transit. And note that under staff recommendation, it would also allow properties that share a property line with others that allow multifamily residential to have opportunity housing, but that's a small number kind of scattered throughout the city. So they're not depicted in this map. And here are a few examples of opportunity housing. I think there's going to be more examples that are going to be shown later, so I'll go through these real quick. The top left and bottom two are Bay Area examples, with the two ones on the left, I believe, in Oakland, and the bottom right is actually a newer example in San Jose. And so the top two on the right here is just a rendering of a duplex that looks like a single family home, one with an entrance from the front and then another entrance from the side. And so at this time, staff is working to complete a cost effectiveness study that was requested by the City Council scope of work. And we're studying the cost effectiveness for both the staff and the task force recommendation by looking at different parts of the city and where it may or may not be cost effective, and whether, location, distance to urban villages or transit, if it makes an impact. So this effort's underway, but it's still early in the stages, but it will be included and discussed as part of the staff report to City Council. So in our next steps for opportunity housing, staff is going to bring this recommendation to City Council later this year. And at that time, City Council would just decide whether or not staff should pursue developing this opportunity housing policy. So should Council direct staff to pursue it, staff would begin a series of action items, including conducting extensive community engagement, conducting a displacement risk analysis, preparing design standards and reviewing them for feedback through the community engagement process, and then preparing an environmental analysis to identify potential impacts of opportunity housing. And that concludes our presentation. If you're interested in learning more about opportunity housing, you can go ahead and visit the site that's on the screen right here, and then email us at generalplanstaff@sanjoseca.gov if you have questions that aren't answered today. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Jessica. Let me just move immediately to introduce Kiyomi and Aaron, who will also give a brief presentation, and then we'll come back and we'll go through the questions, and the presenters and some other folks from the city are available to help us move through those. So go ahead, Kiyomi and Aaron, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Thanks everyone for being here. I think Jessica did a great job of covering what is opportunity housing. So Kiyomi and I wanted to talk a little bit about why we support it and think it would be a really beneficial thing for San Jose. So we're doing this as part of the San Jose Neighborhoods for All Coalition. You can go to the next slide. These are the members of that coalition. You'll see there are groups who are approaching the housing issue from a lot of different perspectives. There are groups like mine that work for California YIMBY that are focused on housing at all income levels. There are groups who have a real priority on housing for lower income residents, including groups who do direct service outreach to that population. There are groups who approach this from a perspective of housing justice and fair housing, groups that are focused on sustainable patterns of development and transportation, groups that are focused on this from a perspective of working families in San Jose. But all of us are sort of united in supporting the city moving forward to study opportunity housing and to look at this policy idea. And we see promise in it from all those different perspectives to address the city's needs, and recognize that all of our goals are currently being hampered by the fact that in over 90% of San Jose, we're not able to build new homes. We're in the middle of a huge housing crisis that's affecting all of our issues. We're not going to be able to get through that if we continue the status quo of having 90% of the city be off limits to new housing. Can we move to the next slide? So our coalition is focused at this point in supporting the council to move forward with the general plan task force recommendations for a study of opportunity housing. These are some of the different factors that were identified by the task force and sort of align generally with our priorities. We all in our groups have a lot of thoughts and ideas about the exact correct policy design for this, and we think there's hopefully going to be a lot of time to talk about that. We want to make sure that the city moves forward with consideration of those different factors so that we're able to have that conversation going forward. And we think it's particularly important that the city look at doing this citywide. We think that all the reasons that this policy can be beneficial to San Jose will be made stronger by expanding this to be citywide. It'll be more effective at producing more housing at a greater variety of price points that can serve a greater range of people. It'll be more effective at creating housing opportunities in high resource neighborhoods, as Jessica touched on, and it can be a step forward for San Jose in sustainable land use patterns. I'm going to now turn it to Kiyomi, who's going to go into a little more depth about the benefits that we see from opportunity housing for San Jose.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Aaron. So the great thing about opportunity housing, particularly citywide, is that it's really a multifaceted smart growth tool. And so I think that's why you see such a diverse group that is supporting this on the slide that Aaron just showed. And so I want to go over with you a couple of the highlights. And if we can go to the next, thank you. So it is potentially a chance for home ownership. So unlike ADUs, opportunity housing allows for both rental and ownership opportunities, particularly for we're looking at middle income families. This is like the who the missing middle is, and we know that these are the folks that don't necessarily qualify for government subsidies, but they're also with housing costs soaring beyond like 1.1 million to buy. They just cannot afford that. And one of the things also we see at the Law Foundation is that there is the people are here, right? There we have overcrowding situations that, particularly during our public health crisis, are just being exacerbated. So this allows for greater flexibility for multi-generational households, both for older family members and also for younger family members who have student loans, just like I do. And it also puts control into the community. So it allows for community-driven development. If we can go to the next slide, thank you. And so this shows like a very nice graph of like the disparity, right? Like how much do you need to earn, right? With examples of careers to like live in a, to be able to rent an apartment, to be able to rent different sizes of apartments, and then to get into an ownership situation. And so you can see that enormous gap, right, between what you're able to rent and then when you're able to buy. And with the missing middle in particular, you know, these are folks that are saving, right? These are the folks that are working and working hard. And with that mindset that we used to have, particularly last mid-century, right, is if you have a job, you've done your education, you've done everything, you know, quote unquote, the right way, you should be able to reach housing stability. And this is why citywide opportunity housing is so important. If we can get to the next, thank you. So fair housing. So this is also really why citywide opportunity is so important. So probably a lot of us are familiar with the Fair Housing Act, enacted about 60 years ago, but it wasn't a magic wand, right? Passage did not mean that it was, now everything was fine. It actually has to be activated through supporting policies, and our Supreme Court, our US Supreme Court recognizes the importance of fair housing laws to eliminate historical patterns of segregation and to create integrated communities. So changes to zoning ordinance may violate fair housing law depending on the specific policy at issue, how it's applied, and whether it has a disproportionate effect upon members of a protected class or to perpetuate historical patterns of segregation. So while we do live in a fairly diverse city, what we're looking at is disproportionate effect upon members of a protected class. So because we have the Fair Housing Act, I want to go to the next slide and talk about like, what does that mean for cities, right? So the state has what we call the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Act. And this means that cities like San Jose, they actually have an affirmative duty to promote the Fair Housing Act. They actually have to do something about it. They can't just be reactionary. And the Othering and Belonging Institute's research shows that there are two obvious ways to promote racial residential integration. One is to preserve integration where it exists, and the second is to give enhanced opportunities and incentives for at least some people to move out of segregated communities and into different race communities. So we think that San Jose can meet its obligation to affirmatively further fair housing and desegregate the city by implementing this city-wide, because we do have to, we want to make sure that all of the communities are accessible to all community, to resource-rich neighborhoods in San Jose. If we can get to the next, thank you. So I want to talk also briefly about why this is a climate smart option. And so my previous life, I was working for a nonprofit, Greenbelt Alliance, that were focusing on protecting open space through promoting smart infill growth. And the idea is when people can live near where they work, they take the sprawl pressure off of our open space lands. We reduce commutes, and then we thereby reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions going into our air. So yesterday was Earth Day, so if you like having clean air and you like going for walks in the park, then we have to direct our development into our currently built existing footprint. If we go to the next slide, you can show, I like this very much because it really shows like where people are commuting from into Santa Clara, and you can also see the surrounding communities. And so the idea again is that we want to reduce people's commutes. It's a waste of people's time. It's a waste, you know, of our environmental resources. And when we can live here near our jobs, we can cut down on our commutes and our traffic. The next few slides here, Greenbelt Alliance is a member of our coalition, and they did support the General Plan Task Force recommendation to go citywide, because it is a way, again, to address some of the issues we talked about earlier, but it's also gentle density. So we're not expecting like, you know, really dramatic, huge changes. You know, I think people think of like bulldozers. That's not what's going to happen. This is just a really easy, nice way to start thinking about how we can bring more people into stable housing. And then the next slide is just a statement from Jessica O'Malley-Feliz, who is the VTA representative. And the idea here, again, is when you invest in housing and the infill, that can also attract transit resources, right? We're always concerned about parking, right? How do we get around the city? We're concerned about greenhouse gas emissions. Well, when you actually create the infrastructure that supports our transit infrastructure, then you're able to address some of those problems and questions. And the next slide before I turn it back over to Aaron is just transit. Like this is the conceptual map from the original recommendation. And I think what it shows nicely here is like, are we creating new walls? Is this just a new form of redlining if we only allow flex housing into these areas? And a lot of these areas are also our under-resourced communities. That puts so much pressure and so much stress. And where we really need to open this up citywide, it's a practical solution, and it also addresses our fair housing question. So Aaron, I'm going to kick it back over to you.
Thanks, Kiyomi. So for those of you here who are hearing all this and thinking, that sounds great, sign me up. We would love to have you be involved in the Neighborhoods for All Coalition. We would love to have you as either an individual living in San Jose or on behalf of an organization endorse the campaign and our effort to help San Jose move forward in implementing opportunity housing. We would love to have you get involved in whatever way is effective for you. We really want to be engaging people and groups across San Jose in demonstrating that there is support for this policy, whether that's on social media, through hosting educational events. I'll put a plug out that we're working on, that's with South Bay, we're working on some walking tours to showcase the existing opportunity housing in San Jose and around the county. We'd love a chance to present to your membership to, take them through this and help them understand what is opportunity housing and what benefits can it bring for them. And yeah, we definitely want you involved, connected with us. We want to be reaching everyone we can because we think this has a lot of benefits for all people, all kinds of people and groups in San Jose. Next slide. So yeah, this is something we know there's going to be a lot of ongoing work on. As I mentioned, the detail, and as Jessica mentioned, the details of this policy remain to be worked out. We think there's a lot of possibility to work on those details to address a lot of the concerns that people have and to advance a whole range of goals that we've addressed. But that starts with us, with this policy moving forward, with council saying, yes, let's keep doing this, let's keep looking at this. What we really don't want is for that process to get short-circuited, and then we lose the opportunity to have these conversations about how opportunity housing can best serve the needs of San Jose. Next slide. And then these are just places where you can connect with us. You'll see our campaign website. We have a place where you can sign the endorsement statement, either as an individual or an organization. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You will see on all of those a lot of great pictures of opportunity housing and how it's already a part of San Jose neighborhoods. And we hope you'll connect with us there. I run the Twitter account, so I particularly would love some new followers, but please do connect with us, and we'd love to talk with you about how we can move this idea forward.
Great, thank you so much. Please put your questions into the chat. We have a team of folks trying to sort through them. And so I will be moving through them, and let's just jump right in. The first one that came up very early, I believe during the city's presentation, is what do you mean by more affordable by design?
Right, and I can take that answer. I mean, that question. You know, if these duplexes, if you're selling a half of it, it's going to be cheaper than a single family home. They're smaller. They're you know, they have an attached wall. It's for example, if you compare the price of a condo, a 3-bed 2-bath condo versus a 3-bed 2-bath single family home, the single family home is obviously going to be in the millions. You know, I think Kristen Clements had posted some numbers in the chat that a single family home was like, the median home price in March was $1.445 million versus a condo slash townhome, which was $790,000. And so that's what we mean by more affordable by design, because they tend to be smaller, even though they may have the same number of bedrooms and bathrooms.
But I want to qualify that smaller does not necessarily mean more affordable, in the fact that in this area, smaller homes are in more demand, and they tend to garner higher prices because of the high demand for them. There's nothing in this policy that defines these are going to be affordable homes. They're going to be rated and listed at market price, and the market will define what the affordability of that house is. There's nothing that this plan does to control that, and will never do that.
I'll just add that
if I could ask, actually, just to keep control, we do have almost 50 people participating. We've trusted folks with their own mute button. I'm going to go through questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We're not going to get through a meaningful discussion if folks jump in. But why don't we turn that question of affordability in the market and how this might work over to the panelists. I think that's an important question for us to talk about. I don't know who wants to take that one.
I'll say we see in other cities where this type of housing is built that it is often produced at prices that are affordable to median income households in those cities. So we shared an example in our presentation of a building in Portland. Portland has a lot of plex scale buildings in which you can buy a home that is affordable to somebody making 100 to 120% of the median income in Portland. This is not like a theoretical idea. This is something that we've observed in Portland, in Minneapolis, in other cities. And we think that there's promise for that in San Jose. I know Adam referred to some things that they had designed, and we can also point to, right, the existing townhomes in San Jose are more affordable than the existing detached single family houses in San Jose.
Yeah, and if I could just follow up maybe quickly on what Aaron is saying. So, we're definitely affordable housing advocates. The Law Foundation is we offer services only for low income tenants. And the idea here too is it's also about availability, affordability and availability. When there are no homes for sale, and when you have a small pool to rent from, the demand for or the price demand goes up, right? Or the cost goes up. And so this is really a way for us to be able to try to keep that missing middle here in the community. Also, I want to just reiterate that we are in the study phase, or we're trying to just get a study. And as someone who works at the Law Foundation, we would be very interested in seeing what incentives can be provided to ensure that some of these units will be affordable as we know that term to be. So thanks.
And Matthew, I'll just.
Oh, go ahead, Jared.
Okay, I'll just add that, yeah, that is correct. That generally the proposed policy is not focused on like your traditional deed restricted affordable housing. That this is really more focused on housing for middle income residents, where there really hasn't been a lot of funding from the state or otherwise to kind of fill that gap. And it's true, right? That 2-bedroom, 1-bath house in San Jose is very expensive, and small homes are in demand. But I think it still holds true, is just like when you compare the prices of the larger homes to smaller homes, typically the smaller ones will be expensive, even though are pretty costly in this region and city. But they would still be more affordable than comparing to a larger home. And again, so that's where the focus is really on that on a middle income households, and just providing more housing choice and opportunity there.
Right, and I also wanted to add, we're doing this cost effectiveness study right now to see at what price points, either a rental or a for sale unit would be under opportunity housing. So that's still yet to be determined, and that'll be, we're studying that right now to see if it will meet the needs that we're looking for, and so that will be published as part of the staff report 220.
Oh, you're
Matthew, you're muted.
Matthew, I don't know if you would comment a comment.
Yeah, you'd think I'd have this mute button figured out by now. I apologize. Just to be clear, it's a big group. Please put your questions into the chat. I'm really eager to have all of the issues come to the table. I know the city is, really been going out of their way to try to respond to concerns. So the intent is not to silence different perspectives, but just to have some control over the time. So let's go right to one of those. Having participated in a number of community discussions, there's a lot of question about what the actual practical density will be in some of these sites, particularly when they're integrated with the accessory dwelling unit laws in the state. And I know, Jessica, that you covered this briefly during the presentation, but I'm wondering if somebody from the city could explain a little more about how those pieces fit together.
Yeah, so in terms of ADUs, so the proposal, I think everyone's clear on that. It's to allow up to 4 units. With the current ADU regulations, then there could be, you could also add, a property owner could propose to add ADUs. So in terms of a maximum amount of units on one site, it would be up to 7. If you had a 4-plex, theoretically, there could be a 4-plex with 2 ADUs and an attached ADU. However, I think the practicality of that would be challenging just based on the city's lotting pattern, and it really would come down to lot size. So while you theoretically could fit up to 7 units on a property, it would very much depend on the size of that property and what I'm getting at is it probably would be challenging space-wise for many of the properties that we have in the city that would come under this policy to actually fit a fourplex plus all the ADUs. So I'd mention that. And hopefully, Matthew, does that get at kind of what you were asking? We can.
It was a
question
from the audience. I think this comes up a lot in discussions, and there's some often there's some confusion about how the existing design guidelines and sort of existing regulations on building out sites would work. But I think you've addressed that with the lot size question. And I believe actually on the city site, there's a little more detail on that. So if you want to get into that a little bit more, I think there's more information on that. Okay, next question. The next one, well, I'm going to take them out of order. The next one was, could you talk a little bit about the implications for racial and economic equity if opportunity housing is limited to transit areas only? I think we heard a little bit from Aaron and Kiyomi on this, and I'm just wondering if the city staff has a response to that question.
Right, yeah, in our analysis, we, through the task force process, we studied both like a quarter mile and then the half mile. And so in our findings, comparing the quarter mile and half mile, it was more equitable, expanding it out to the half mile. But citywide, that's council direction wanted us to explore within the half mile. So we generally stayed within that. And I don't know, Jared, if you want to add anything.
No, nothing to add on that one. Oh, you're on mute, Matthew.
Kiyomi, I think we heard from you on that. Do you have any additional comments that you want to share, or are you okay?
No, I'm okay. I think it's just a reminder that we're looking to, open this city-wide because we're trying to provide access to all communities that are particularly resource rich, and remove the exclusionary zoning that has created certain patterns and provided barriers for economic stability and mobility. So, but that's all. Thanks, Matthew.
Great. So there's also questions about why San Jose has such a large allocation from the state. And there was a comment in the chat about how San Jose seemed to be carrying the weight for the region in terms of housing production. Could we touch on that quickly? Because I think that's important context.
Sure, I would mention, so in terms of the regional housing needs allocation, so San Jose has a large allocation. Our goals are set high for the number of units, particularly when you compare it to other cities in the county. However, we are by far, in a way, the largest city in the county. So just by the sheer size, the state and our regional cog ABAG is going to assign us a larger amount of units in terms of our regional housing goals. I think what's important to kind of point out too is that, so in this next housing element cycle, so this next the most recent regional housing needs allocation that has been assigned by ABAG, the increase in units from the previous cycle, our increase is actually a lot less than most other cities in the county. While we're seeing a large allocation and an increase in the amount of units that for our goal, it's actually the increase in units in terms of a percentage is quite a bit less than a lot of our neighbors. So there is an emphasis being put on other cities in the county who traditionally have not provided as much housing as San Jose, there's a push and kind of an expectation that those cities will also step up and provide housing for the region.
Yeah, I would just comment, if folks want to go to our webpage, we actually have some coverage of the different allocations. And Jared spoke to it. Other folks are having a larger proportional increase from the last round. I would also point out a lot of the neighboring cities have been doing a significantly better job than they have historically in approving housing. City of Santa Clara has an active housing pipeline of proposals to entitlements to buildings under construction that are going to add 37% to the total number of housing units in that city. So folks are trying to step up. I don't think it's San Jose that's the only one that's trying to respond to the housing crisis. Let's talk just a little bit about how the policy might work to facilitate this type of building. There's a comment that acknowledges that we adopted an ADU policy, but there continue to be challenges in getting ADUs permitted and built. Is there a discussion so far in the city about how to make sure that this is a process that isn't encumbered by regulation that makes it impossible or hard to engage?
I'd say I think in terms of the process for opportunity housing, in terms of a permitting process, that's definitely something that would be explored in the next phase of this work. If council provides direction to continue working on this, then those are the kind of details that need to be established. Whether it's, I know there was a question about, what by right means, I saw in the chat, and that basically refers to, it's a property owner's use of a property, basically that's identified as being permitted or like permissible in the zoning district where the property is located. So what that typically means is, like, if that permitted use meets all the requirements and standards in the zoning ordinance, that there's not a discretionary planning permit required. You typically, you may need to go on, get building permits, but that there's not a discretionary permit. But ultimately, the process, any kind of, the permanent details of the permitting process for this would be established in that next phase of work.
Could you clarify, Jared? There's a fair amount of confusion about by right. Now, you just addressed it, but my understanding is this is not going to be a change, that currently on a single family site, you can redevelop with a new single family structure as long as it meets the design guidelines and rules. That is a by right redevelopment. Could you speak to that? Because I think there's some sense that it's this new policy that's going to wipe out some sort of existing community review process.
Right. So the current process for building a single family home on, you're in a conventional zoning district and you want to, in a single family zoned property, is that, right, if you meet, the development standards and the criteria of the zoning district, if you meet certain criteria, it's a permitted, it's permissible. You would just go to building and you would get building permits, which is a ministerial process. There's no discretion. There's not a public hearing. And so that's our current process. There is, depending on the proposal for a single family home, if you're over, a certain, what's called floor area ratio, or it's a historic, in a historic conservation area, then we do have a process for that, which is called a single family house permit. And that is a discretionary planning permit. So again, I think those are the kind of the aspects that would need to be established in that second phase of work. Now, currently, like a duplex would need a permit, would need a discretionary planning permit under the current regulations, while a single family house would not. So those are things that would need to, we would be further exploring on what's the best approach for the permitting process to be successful.
Okay.
I think this is one of the policy details that's most important to get right if we want this to
Aaron, could you speak up just a little bit?
Yeah, sorry. I think this is one of the policy details that's most important to get right if we want this to be successful and to be accessible to ordinary homeowners in San Jose. If a homeowner who wants to build a duplex on their lot has to potentially go before city council to get approval, they're not going to do that. You know, big developers are used to negotiating the discretionary permitting process in San Jose and other cities in California. But individual homeowners who want to be part of adding housing in their community are not used to negotiating that process. And so we need to create a process if we want this to be successful and to be broadly accessible outside of, you know, the large developer community, where the rules are known in advance. We can have rules, set design standards, but set those rules in advance and allow people to know what to expect when they enter that process.
And for the single family house, just a clarification it's like for the process currently for a single family house permit, if you're going through that, it basically what it goes to, it's called a director's hearing, where it's a hearing overseen by the planning director that's appealable to the planning commission. So that would be the process. But I hear what I think what Aaron's saying is that, yeah, in terms of the comment on the process.
So we have just a couple of minutes. This has not come up as I am getting a summary of the questions that have been in the chat, but I know there's been a lot of discussion about whether this would require a change to the city's policy on heritage trees, and, you know, is this a new set of guidelines in terms of tree coverage? I was wondering if you all could speak to where you were on that, because it's a common concern.
Sure. Yeah. So there's no proposal to change our current tree removal and tree permitting process. So yeah, we you know, that has been a common concern that we've heard about loss of tree canopy, and I know definitely understand that's valued by the community. And yeah, the proposal doesn't have there's no proposed changes to allow you know, additional removal and non-replacement of trees that isn't, you know, that from our current process now. Those regulations and requirements would stay in place.
Great. All right, we are at time. This is an ongoing discussion. There's a tremendous amount of additional information that wasn't covered today. We really appreciate people coming and participating. I see that the chat has been active. I appreciate people sharing their perspectives and their ideas. Jessica, have you had an opportunity to drop the link to your landing page on this into the chat? I think that would be super helpful. I know that the San Jose Neighborhoods for All link is also in the chat. There will be more discussions. There are a number of sessions, events scheduled during Affordable Housing Week. Month, excuse me, that's coming up in May that will cover this, and we will send those out specifically to folks that registered for this event, so you have an opportunity to follow up. I see that a poll has popped up onto our screen. Please take a moment to give us some feedback. We really appreciate everybody's participation and want to learn and figure out how to get better at responding to everybody's needs. So I will allow this poll to continue. Allison, I don't know if you have a closing or if you want me to close this out.
So just a reminder, thank you, Matthew, and thank you to all of our panelists. I appreciate that. We understand that not everyone is completely sold on opportunity housing, but it's important to have these discussions moving forward. So just a reminder that SV at Home is a membership organization. Please feel free to support us via membership or donation. Our May hack will be same time, same place, and our topic will be a discussion of Richard Rothstein's conversation on the 13th of May. So we have the poll up there. If you could just take the poll really quickly before you pop out. And thank you all for attending. It's been a great conversation.